The failed result of an experiment, this being was created to be a lord. Unfortunately, its destiny had very different plans for it, as it turned out to be nothing at all. While some might find this a curse, it found it a blessing, because when you are nothing, then you can become anything. And still, there was only one being that it sought after, the majestic dragon, once Elden Lord long ago. Having fashioned armor from scales made of metal and stone, as well as the fire-resistant skin of lizards, it tried to imitate that which it admired. Soon enough, through enough desired, it managed to reach its transformation. This is a being that does not worship the dragon. This is a being that is the dragon. A destiny built, Silverscale shines on. This is an arcane faith build that has an absolute focus on the Dragon Communion Incantations. It is a full caster build that takes advantage of magnificent area of effect incantations as well as access to different damage types and status effects. With plenty of damage boosting gear and multiple offensive options, this dragon can adapt to all of the dangers found in the lands between. As always, we will review the stats of this build, the equipment that we use, and of course, its applications within the game. Since there is a lot of content to cover, I have created timestamps in the description of this video in order to make it easier to navigate it and give you the opportunity to skip straight to the part that interests you the most. Let's get started. While making this build, I found out that an arcane faith caster can be very powerful. It has a lot of options, and they're all capable of dealing high amounts of damage, whether that is with incantations or through the use of status effects. I wanted to lean into these abilities, so I focused on the Dragon Communion Incantations, as well as considerable bleed application on our weapon. In this way, we are able to have access to good options at both melee and range, as well as options for single target threats or groups of mobs. We are able to achieve this through the combination of incantations that we already mentioned with the different options of roar type Ashes of War. And still, one of the best characteristics of this build is that we can achieve this without making too many sacrifices on the defensive side. This build boasts a very high HP pool to take a few hits, a high FP pool to upkeep consistent casting, and an average amount of damage absorption. While true that this build will not be a tank, it is also not a glass cannon. It is a cannon, but made out of scales. All in all, this build provides us with balanced experiences that puts every option available in the hands of the player. To reach this objective, we will be running the following stats. Start the game as a prophet. This class is the most efficient to reach the required stat block for this build, allowing us to make use of every rune level possible to its maximum potential. As the primary focus of this build is PvE, I have chosen to base it on rune level 150. Finally, this is the stats block that you want to end up with. 60 Vigor, 43 Mind, 15 Endurance, 12 Strength, 10 Dexterity, 7 Intelligence, 30 Faith, and 52 Arcane, plus 8 from the Silver Tier Mask for a total of 60. There are many ways to reach these stats. Level up however you feel comfortable. That said, I do recommend that you take the following path. As soon as you're in the lands between, the first thing to do is get your Vigor to 20. Survivability is more important than damage when you're just starting out a character. The second priority will be to get Strength to 12, Faith to 17, and Arcane to 13. This will give you access to our weapon of choice for the build, as well as allow us to use some basic Dragon Communion Incantations that will provide us many more options for the early game. The third priority will be to get Arcane to 30. This is the main stat of the build. It helps with both our incantation and weapon damage, and we also need it to meet the requirements for a few more Dragon Communion Incantations. The fourth priority is to get Vigor to 40. This will allow you to survive comfortably throughout the mid-game, letting you focus on your other stats. The fifth priority is to get Endurance to 15 and Mind to 20. This will increase our equip load, allowing us to use more protective armor, and the extra Mind will make the build a bit more comfortable when it comes to spell casting. The sixth priority is to get Faith to 30. Faith is the second primary stat of the build. We need it to meet the requirements of our strongest incantations, and it also boosts the incantation scaling of the Dragon Communion Seal. The seventh priority is to top off Vigor at 60. This will put you at our required HP pool, granting you maximum security to withstand the hardest hitting attacks from the endgame enemies. The eighth priority is to bring Arcane to 52. This will close out our main stat and provide us with maximum damage scaling for both our weapon and incantations. It also gives us other nice secondary effects like extra discovery. Remember that this stat will be brought to 60 with the use of the Silver Tier Mask. Finally, the ninth priority is to bring Mind to 43. We are basically dumping all of our remaining points into Mind so that we can maintain continuous casting for as long as possible. Not only this, but we also get considerable efficient use out of Cerulean Flasks. Do we need this much Mind? Probably not, but it is nice to have. So, why do we want these final stats? Allow me to explain. Vigor at 60 because I believe it is the perfect amount of health to survive the hardest hitting attacks of PvE. This will give us a total of 1900 base HP. It is the second cap for the stat. Going any higher really diminishes your returns, and honestly I would never go any lower. Mind at 43 because this is a caster build and we want as much FP as possible. In all honesty, we probably don't need this to be this high, but the build already has all of the other stats covered, so I dumped the remaining points into it. Alternatively, you can take out some points from Mind and put them into Endurance for additional fashion options. Endurance at 15 because it has been min-maxed in order to let the character use the weapons and armors that I prefer for this build. It is perfected to have 68.6% equip load. If you put any less points, we lose the build. If you put any more points, you're wasting them. Strength at 12 because it is what we need in order to meet the requirements for our weapon of choice. This is primarily a caster build, so melee combat is secondary and only used to save FP between lesser enemies. Dexterity at 10 because it is the base level of the Prophet. It is already enough to use the weapon we want, and we don't need any more. Do not level this at all. Intelligence at 7 because it is the base level of the Prophet. We do not need to level this up at all. Faith at 30 because it is one of the most important stats of the build. It covers the requirements of the incantations that we want to use and also helps out with the incantation scaling of the Dragon Communion Seal. Finally, Arcane at 52 because it is the primary stat of the build. It gives us damage scaling for both our weapon and incantations, and it also increases the bleed application of our weapon. It increases the power of all our offensive options. Moving on to the equipment, this is the basic layout of the build. The main focus of this character is, like we mentioned before, the Dragon Communion Incantations. This is a caster build and we want to maximize the efficiency and power of our casting. That said, we still want to keep the defenses of the build reliable and we want to diversify our options. I believe that this is the best way to do so. Starting with the armaments, our weapon of choice is the Occult Morning Star. I imagine this character as a cleric, and this weapon is a staple in a clerical arsenal. This hammer-type weapon provides us with a good way to eliminate lesser enemies without having to waste our valuable FP. It gives us strike-type damage, my favorite kind, and it also provides us the added value of the bleed status effect. Thanks to the Occult Infusion, we can increase the blood application of this weapon through the Arcane stat, and this puts more damage on the table. Overall, it is a perfect side armament that increases the sustainability of the build. That being said, it is important to mention that I use the Morning Star because I prefer the way it looks and how it fits the fashion of the build. If you prefer, you can use the Occult Spiked Club to substitute it. The Spiked Club provides us with more damage than the Morning Star, and it does so with the same amount of bleed application and the exact same weight. Furthermore, the Spiked Club has more range and reach than the Morning Star. In all honesty, the Spiked Club is probably the objectively better weapon. The only reason to use this Morningstar is if you are like me and prefer fashion over stats, or if you enjoy the few piercing attacks that the Morningstar's movesets offers. Regardless of which weapon you want to use, the Ash of War that I prefer in this setup is Barbaric Roar. Not only do Roar type ashes fit the theme of the build, but we also increase its efficiency through some of our talisman choices. I prefer to use Barbaric Roar because the special R2 attack that it provides is a 3-hit combo that is very good at applying the bleed status effect. That being said, if you do not care so much about the R2 changes, then Braggart's Roar is the optimal choice, as it provides us with stronger effects for a longer period of time. Of course, you can use any Ash of War that allows you to go down the occult path, but I have had good results with these. In the offhand, I run the Alvinoric Shield. There is no specific reason for running this shield besides the way it looks. It fits the fashion, so I went with it. That said, it does provide a very good amount of guard boost for a medium shield of its weight, so it helps with some good blocks and counterattacks that are efficient at defeating lesser enemies and saving some FP. As for its Ash of War, I chose no skill. I'd rather have the skill of my Morningstar more easily accessible. Other than this, you could run any other shield that you prefer based on the looks, as long as it doesn't put you into heavy load. Pick whatever you like. Now, let's talk about the incantation seals. The obvious choice in this build is the Dragon Communion seal. It is a hybrid seal that scales off Arcane as well as Faith, so it is perfect for the setup. Furthermore, it provides us with a damage boost to Dragon Communion Incantations, our most used incantation type. Specifically, the boost is 15%. Now, I am sure that you have noticed that this build runs 2 Dragon Incantation seals, one in each hand. The reason that we do this is because the damage boost that these catalysts provide stack with each other. That's right, if we have one seal on each hand, when we cast our incantations, we get additional damage. With both seals active, the damage boost goes from 15% to 32%, since they apply multiplicatively. This is the effect of what I like to call dual wield casting, and I explain the full technique in detail in this video. Feel free to check it out at the link in the description. In any case, the concept is simple. Whenever you cast a Dragon Communion Incantation, make sure that you have both seals out for optimized damage potential. With our weapons out of the way, let's talk about Talismans. This build has 2 objectives when it comes to Talismans: survivability and damage. This means that we want to have a lot of HP to survive as many hits as possible, but also maximize the damage that our incantations deal. For these reasons, we are running the Erdtree Favor +2 and the Crimson Amber Medallion +2 in order to get the HP values we want, and then the Roar Medallion and Flux Cambest Talisman to give us the damage boost that we are looking for. With this setup, we will have a total of 2134 HP. Then, the Roar Medallion gives us 2 different damage boosts. The special R2s from Barbaric Roar receive a 15% damage boost, and then it gives all Elemental Dragon Breath incantations as well as Greyoll's Roar an additional 10% damage. Finally, Flux Cambest Talisman contributes to this with an additional 8% damage output to all incantations. As always, these damage boosts are multiplicative, and later in the video we will review the true total of the damage boost we receive. Alright, let's talk about armor. In this game, armor is extremely important. This is because this game has extremely good looking armor. Fashion Souls, or Elden Bling, however you prefer to call it, is at an all-time high. The concept for the fashion was an armored cleric seeking to be a dragon. Of course, everything is playing around the silver tier mask to create an entity that has evolved into full sentience with complete desire. We reach this objective by combining the scale armor, as it is based on a tunic with metal scales and some lizard skin. Then we add the scaled gloves and the scaled legs, as they present scales of stone. I think that this combination meets our goal perfectly and brings to life a recognizable character. Overall, this setup gives us a total of 26% damage negation. Admittedly, this is not a lot, but it is also not a little. This is a fair amount of defense that allows us to be safe from most attacks. It also provides us with 51 poise, which is a perfect amount for PvE play, as most attacks deal 50 points of poise damage. We will be able to tank a single hit from most enemies. I am very happy with how this fashion turned out. It fits the idea perfectly and looks very clean. Not only this, but it also provides us with decent stats to support the character. It is a good compromise between looks and power. I honestly enjoyed it a lot. When it comes to the spirit summon that we will use for this build, I decided that the best choice is the Mimic. First of all, it is my favorite summon in the game, and that alone makes me use it in almost every single build that I make. That said, it does come with strategic advantages. The main thing that this summon will give us is extreme area of effect pressure on the enemies. The Mimic will not be afraid of using all of the Dragon Communion Incantations that it has at its disposal. You, the player, will be in a close combat battle with the enemy, surrounded by walls of flame and ice and rot. You will see mobs sent flying by the mighty roar of your summon, and, if you're fighting a boss, you will experience the fierce bite of a stance-breaking Dragonmaw crushing all opposition. The Mimic is a perfect caster support for this build, putting massive amounts of damage on the table as well as different status effects that will dominate the battlefield. I believe that the best way to summon the Mimic is with the 2 Dragon Communion seals, one in each hand, as it optimizes damage. That said, if you do not have 2 Dragon Communion seals yet, or you prefer a more balanced setup, you can definitely summon the Mimic with the Morning Star on one hand and the Incantation Seal on the other. Of course, we cannot forget about the defensive capabilities of the Mimic. This build can summon it with an HP pool of over 7,000 points, and the armor it has makes it relatively durable. Overall, the Mimic in this build can generate a lot of offensive value while maintaining the ability of sustaining aggro. You can be the front line, you can be the back line, or you can fight side by side. These options make the Mimic the most optimal summon for your Dragon Cleric. As we have mentioned a few times, this character is focused on being a cleric that uses Dragon Communion Incantations. Obviously, we will be making a heavy investment on these kinds of miracles. The list that I will show you tries to provide an option for every situation, both offensive and defensive, and also diversify the answers that we have when facing the different problems that the game will present us. I use every single memory slot with this character, and every incantation serves a true purpose. The list is what you see on the screen. Dragon Eyes, Dragonfire, Rotten Breath, Dragonclaw, Dragonmaw, Greyoll's Roar, Lightning Spear, Heal, and Flame Cleanse Me. The first 3 incantations on the list are Dragon Eyes, Dragonfire, and Rotten Breath. These 3 are very important, and I grouped them together because they serve a similar purpose. In fact, they have 2 main jobs: crowd control and status effect domination. First of all, they are great AoE attacks that allow us to eliminate or heavily injure groups of enemies before they become a problem. Dragonfire is specifically useful in situations against enemies that are staggered by fire. Enemies like dogs or the huge Miranda plants will begin to writhe in pain when attacked with this damage type. This opens up the opportunity for further damage. Second, in the cases of Dragon Eyes and Rotten Breath, they allow us to proc Frostbite and Scarlet Rot, respectively, on our targets very easily. Frostbite deals a set amount of damage to the target and, most importantly, inflicts a debuff that lowers their damage negation by 20%. And then of course, Scarlet Rot is an extremely potent damage over time debuff that increases DPS on any boss fight that it is used. Overall, all 3 are very important parts of the incantation list due to the fact that they cover many different enemy weaknesses and provide reliable space control with high amounts of damage. Dragonclaw is an incantation that I find very important to have on my list. It takes care of mob groups in a concentrated area of effect, and it does so using large amounts of physical type damage. Furthermore, it can also be used to knock down enemies and provide spacing advantages. At face value, you might think that this is something that we can achieve with other incantations, and that is true. But the value of Dragonclaw is the fact that we can control whether it does one claw attack or two. This allows us to control FP spending and make sure to only use what we need. Furthermore, this incantation provides us with some hyper armor that allows us to trade hits with the enemy and come ahead in damage. This, of course, makes it a good pressure tool as well. And with all of this said, we cannot ignore the dangers of using Dragonclaw. Against larger enemies, it might not always knock them down, and we might find ourselves taking way too much damage before the incantation actually reaches its active frames. Also, while Dragonclaw gives us hyper armor, it is not infinite. Depending on what attack an enemy uses, it is possible to be interrupted. Overall, I think that this is a good incantation to have on the list, but it is still important to understand its weaknesses and use it appropriately. Dragonmaw is the incantation that you want to use against high priority targets. Larger enemies with larger HP pools are perfect targets for this incantation. Dragonmaw gives us two very important things: high physical type damage and high stance damage. The obvious weakness is that it does not have a large area of effect. While it is technically possible to hit multiple enemies with one Dragonmaw, it is not designed to do this. If you're looking for answers to groups of enemies, we have better options. Furthermore, this incantation also gives us heavy amounts of hyper armor that allows us to trade with the enemies. Taking into consideration the large amounts of physical damage, stance damage, and knockdown potential that this incantation has, any trade will always be in your favor. This is one of my favorite tools to use in combination with the Mimic. With a little bit of luck, you can have your summon combine Dragonmaws with you, and it simply deletes enemies from the game. That being said, if I were to point out a negative factor that this incantation has, it is definitely its casting speed. It is, without a doubt, slow, and that might make it harder to connect with the enemy. Even with the hyper armor that it provides us and the large reach it has from its lunging animation, missing is a possibility due to the long wind-up. Personally, I try to begin the casting time of this incantation as an enemy charges me in order to minimize the chances of missing. Overall, this is an incantation that will always perform well, so use it and abuse it. Greyoll's Roar is one of my favorite incantations to have on this list. Providing a large area of effect around the character, it is capable of cleaning up a room with very little effort. The perfect tool to dominate a group of lesser enemies in close combat, but also to knock down and generate advantages on larger enemies. This incantation gives a lot of value to the build. Let's not forget that, on top of the damage that it deals to all enemies around the caster, and on top of the knockdown potential that it provides us, it also inflicts a debuff on each and every enemy that it hits. This debuff lowers the enemy's attack power by 15% and their defenses by 10%. This debuff lasts for 60 seconds. Overall, this makes it a good tool for bosses as well, as it lowers the damage that they deal to us while increasing that which we deal to them. That said, in order to have a full understanding of the incantation, it is important to realize that it does have a slow casting time. It takes about 2 seconds from the moment you cast the incantation to the moment that the enemy takes damage. This is a long time, and we take a risk of being interrupted if we do not plan accordingly. Nevertheless, Greyoll's Roar is a good tool to have prepared. Remember that our Mimic will also have access to it, and personally, I love seeing this summon debuff my enemies while I concentrate on keeping up DPS. Maybe it's not an incantation to abuse, but definitely make sure to use it often. Lightning Spear is in this list of incantations for a single reason. I need to have a tool that will allow me to target single enemies at a distance. Like what a bow and arrow would do, except I want to do much more damage. The advantages that this brings to the table are very valuable. First, it allows me to draw enemies from packs by aggroing them one at a time and pulling them towards me. And second, it allows me to dispose of weaker enemies that are too far away from my position while keeping the FP consumption down. Obviously, this will make Lightning Spear one of the least used incantations in the build because it is an answer to a very specific situation. That said, I would not like to be caught without it. Being able to take care of a lesser enemy at range with one Lightning Spear that costs 17 FP is much better than having to waste a Dragon Breath casting that will cost me 3 times the amount. Not all of our options need to be optimized in the damage that they deal. Sometimes I need something that will simply make my life easier, and Lightning Spear does just that. Heal is the only healing spell that I use. That said, its purpose is not exactly to heal myself. In fact, I use this spell for one thing and one thing only: to kill Revenants. Revenants are one of the most powerful and annoying non-boss type enemies that you can find in the game. They deal incredible amounts of damage and are in constant motion and attack. They teleport around the area, and I am sure you have seen, they have that one move where they hit you 1,000,000 times with all of their limbs in succession. It is very difficult to fight them, but fortunately, if you do not let them get started on their offense, then they become much easier to defeat. In order to achieve this, we use heal. Revenants are very weak to holy damage, but also they are extremely weak to healing spells. If you cast a healing spell with an AoE and it catches the Revenant, they will take damage instead of being healed. The amount of damage they take is always the same, 50% of their max HP plus an additional 300 damage. 2 spells will always take care of them, and since the first spell also staggers them, it is very easy to cast 2 of them back to back for the kill. Since the damage is always the same, I like to use heal because it costs the least FP out of all of the AoE heals. If you execute this strategy correctly, then you will defeat the Revenant before it even has a chance to hit you. Flame Cleanse Me is one of the most powerful incantations in the game. It provides a fast, cheap way to get rid of poison and, most importantly, Scarlet Rot. This should always be in your list of spells. Scarlet Rot is extremely annoying, and so is poison. This is especially harmful in Elden Ring because, due to the size of the game and all of the exploring that we do, having a damage over time debuff like poison or Scarlet Rot is really bad for your resource management. Furthermore, it is good to note that this incantation deals a very minuscule amount of fire damage to you when you cast it. The damage itself is insignificant, but it is still fire type damage. This means that we can use this incantation to remove the effects of Frostbite, another dangerous status effect. As a result, Flame Cleanse Me becomes an indispensable tool to improve our comfort during exploration. Do not leave home without it. Now, after going through the full list of incantations that I like to use in this build, I am sure that you, my dear viewer, have a very important question. Why do I prefer to use the basic version of each of the Dragon Breath incantations and not the upgraded named Dragon Breaths? The answer is simple. I do not think that the upgraded Dragon Breaths are worth it. I do not think that the value they provide is enough to cover for the additional costs that they demand. Please take a look at this supporting evidence. All of the information that you see here has been gathered under the exact same controlled conditions. I have used these 3 basic Dragon Breaths and their upgraded named counterparts with this exact same build against the exact same enemy with the exact same parameters. Each Dragon Breath incantation was used against the same Omen enemy found in the subterranean Shining Grounds, and I did a full cast of each one to see how much damage it dealt. Here you can see the results. Probably the most important points are the FP cost and the damage. In this build, with these exact same stats and this exact same equipment, attacking this particular enemy, the upgraded named Dragon Breath incantations deal about 5 to 6% more damage. The Ice Breath incantations are special because they add more damage thanks to the Frostbite proc, which brings the difference down to about 3%. That said, as a general result, we can say that it is about 6% more damage that the named dragon incantations provide us. And then of course, we have the FP cost. The upgraded named dragon incantation cost us 50% more FP to execute a full cast. At face value, I can tell you that in my opinion, getting 6% more damage is not worth an extra 50% more FP consumption. That said, let's continue to look at the other differences. The basic Dragon Breath incantations have a slightly shorter range, but a slightly wider spread on their area of effect. Obviously, the named Dragon Breath incantations are the opposite, giving us more range but a narrower spread. And then, when it comes to mobility, the basic Dragon Breath incantations allow us to use them while on horseback, but not while in the air. The named Dragon Breaths are again the opposite. They cannot be used on horseback, but we can use them in the air. It becomes a matter of what you are looking for as a player. Do you want a shorter but wider area of effect that can be used on horseback, or do you want a longer but narrower area of effect that can be used in the air? As I am sure that you figured out, in my opinion, I think that the basic Dragon Breaths are better. I prefer the wider area of effect and the ability to cast these incantations on horseback for some drive-by damage. Furthermore, I think that an additional 15% FP cost is not worth the small damage increase that we get, or the ability to cast while jumping. I believe that the basic Dragon Breath incantations are more efficient and provide us more value for the cost than the upgraded named dragon versions. Of course, you are free to use what you prefer, but I believe that these reasons explain my decision perfectly. The last thing that I want to go over regarding this build is the total amount of damage boost that we can give our incantations through our equipment. It is important because the total amount of damage that we can reach is considerable, and it goes a long way in defeating enemies efficiently and saving FP. While it is true that we don't really need to do much besides equip the right items, I still think that it is important to understand how the different damage boosts stack together. In this build, we take advantage of 4 damage boosting items: the Dragon Communion Seal, which we use 2 of, the Roar Medallion, and the Flux Canvas Talisman. The Dragon Communion Seal gives our Dragon Communion Incantations 15% additional damage. Then the Roar Medallion gives our Breath type and Roar type incantations an additional 10% more damage. Finally, the Flux Canvas Talisman gives all our incantations an 8% damage boost. Remember that all of these boosts stack with each other multiplicatively, not additively. This means that we do not add these numbers together, but instead we multiply the total result of each boost into the next one. So, how much actual damage increase do we get? Well, we grab the first 15% boost from the first catalyst and multiply it into the second catalyst boost. Then we multiply the 10% from the Roar Medallion boost, and finally the 8% from the Flux Canvas Talisman boost. This is represented by 1.15 times 1.15 times 1.1 times 1.08. The total is 1.5711. We round this down to 1.57 for the sake of simplicity, and we can understand that the full and complete damage boost is a total of 57% extra damage. Of course, this extra 57% extra damage is not applied to all our incantations. It is only applied to the Breath type and Roar type Dragon Communion Incantations. As such, Dragon Fire, Dragon Ice, Rotten Breath, and Greyoll's Roar will receive the full damage boost. Then we have Dragonclaw and Dragonmaw. These are Dragon Communion Incantations, but they are not Breath type or Roar type, so they do not get the boost from the Roar Medallion. The result is that they get two 15% boosts from the Catalysts and the 8% boost from the Flux Canvas Talisman. This is 1.15 times 1.15 times 1.08 for a total of 43% additional damage. Finally, Lightning Spear. This is not a Roar type or Breath type incantation. It is also not a Dragon Communion incantation. The result is that it only gets the 8% boost from Flux Canvas Talisman. As you can see, and as we mentioned many times before, this build tips heavily in favor of the Breath type and Roar type Dragon Communion incantations. This does not mean that Dragonclaw and Dragonmaw are not powerful. On the contrary, they are amazing tools at close range. But still, the maximized damage potential will be given by the Dragon Breaths and the Roar. If you made it this far in the video, then I have to confess something. I do not like this build. I honestly think that Dragon Communion incantations are not that fun. This of course does not mean that they are not good. On the contrary actually, if I were to gauge the power level of every build that I have made, this Dragon Cleric is probably in the top 3. The damage that it provides, the status application, the comfort, and the efficiency. Everything falls in place to create an extremely effective and powerful build with fantastic synergies. While I may not like the flavor, it is impossible to ignore its power, and I will continue to play it often. I fully recommend this build to anyone. It is powerful and it is easy to play. Arcane Faith is an extremely strong archetype, potentially the best, and it will generate value to any player that decides to give it a try. Hopefully, you are able to make it work for you as much as it worked for me. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope that I get to see you on the next one.